Another question. The war in Iraq has lasted longer than World War II. More than 4,000 young Americans have been killed, and there's no end in sight. The Bush administration took us into this war under false pretenses. Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction, and it was not involved in the 9/11 attacks. Vermont has suffered far more than its share of casualties, and many young Vermonters have been called back for several tours of duty in Iraq. It has been suggested that the governor, as commander of the state militia, might be able to stop the deployment of young Vermonters to Iraq. As governor, what will you do with respect to Vermont's involvement in this war?
First of all, I do think the governor could play a much stronger role in questioning what's going on in Iraq and opposing the war, and in standing up and questioning whether or not any more of our soldiers, our National Guards folks, should be required to go back to that war, which is now more illegal than it ever was. You're right. When the Congress gave the authority to use the National Guard, they said that they were doing that for two reasons primarily. One was to get rid of Saddam Hussein, and the other was to find the weapons of mass destruction or enforce the UN investigation into weapons of mass destruction. Now, we know that when we went into that war, we went in based on a lot of lies and a lot of misinformation. But the bottom line is, even considering the reasons why we went that were false, the fact is Saddam Hussein is gone, and the weapons of mass destruction, they were never there, so they're clearly gone. So the authority to use the National Guard troops is essentially been taken off the table. You know, the war was illegal to begin with, and now there's no more authority under the law to really use those troops for that purpose. Now, the governor can, it's a gray area, quite honestly, as to the legal authority of the governor. I just want to be clear on that. The governor does oversee the National Guard. There have been times when governors have challenged the sending of troops to foreign countries, and I think it would be more than appropriate to do that in this case. So when I'm governor, I will do everything possible to resist requiring any more Vermonters to be sent into harm's way in a war that is not only illegal, but certainly absolutely unnecessary, and one that the great majority of us oppose. You know, it's interesting to me that in this democracy, we're involved in a war that 70% of us don't want to be involved in, but we continue to be involved in it. And I also want to go back to one thing you said, which is that, you know, Vermont, there's a lot of good things about Vermont. We have a lot of things. We talk about how Vermont is a great place to raise kids and one of the safest places to live. And, you know, we have some of the best schools in the country. We talk about all these distinctions that we have. But we have another very dubious distinction, which is we have the highest per capita rate of deaths in this war. And it's a distinction we don't want. I think Vermonters have done their best to do their best for this country. But it's clearly time to put an end to the war and to keep our National Guard troops here at home. You know, interestingly, there's talk about a large call-up within the next 6 months or so of a larger number of Vermont Guards people. And so now then the National Guard in Vermont is actually reaching out to former members of the Guard, you know, older folks, for lack of a better way of putting it, and asking them if they would be willing to re-enlist in the Guard, because there's concern that if this call-up happens, so many Vermont Guards people will be overseas that should there be an emergency here in Vermont, we will not be able to handle it. And, you know, we're talking about whether it's flooding or loss of electricity or ice storms. There's a lot of things when we call out the National Guard to help us in times of emergency, and we're stretching that very thin. So I would like to see our governor, and as governor, what I would do is I would speak out against the war, as I have all along. I would actually reach out to other governors to get them to speak out as well, because I think Congress needs to hear more from the folks at the local level. And then I would do everything I could to resist sending more Vermont troops to this war, which is clearly illegal and unnecessary.
On the subject of the casualties, Vermont has been a blue state in both of Bush's elections. I wonder if that doesn't go into the calculation of young Vermonters put at risk of being killed.
You know, it's hard to say. You have to just really appreciate the fact that so many young people are actually these days, you know, well, middle-aged, older folks, it's hard to say these days, but, you know, people with families. You have to appreciate the sacrifice that they're willing to make to leave their families, to go overseas, to go to war for long periods of time, to leave their jobs, leave their kids. It's an incredible sacrifice. And then those who make the ultimate sacrifice, you have to really appreciate that, but you really have to question whether it's necessary. And then you have to question why it is we don't take better care of our, in this case, our veterans when they come back, and why it is that we would continue to allow them to go put themselves in harm's way for a war that seems more and more senseless the longer it goes on. I appreciate what they're doing, but I think as a leader, you want to support our country, you want to be patriotic, of course, but you also want to do what's best for the people of this country. And not only were we talking about, the personal sacrifice, the death and the injury that comes to our soldiers and our National Guards people, but also the incredible financial cost. I mean, when we talk about, the need for fuel assistance here in Vermont, when we talk about the need for weatherization money here in Vermont, when we talk about the fact that we don't have the money to fix our roads and bridges, we can't meet all our special education needs in our schools. In every one of those conversations, we have to remember that we are spending about $12 billion a month now on this war for oil halfway around the world that Americans don't want to be involved in. Even if you took a share of Vermont's contribution to that war, I mean, as taxpayers, we're funding it, but really it's our grandkids who are funding it, because a lot of it is borrowed money. But you think about all the buildings and homes that we could retrofit to use renewable energy and be more energy efficient, to break our dependence on oil. I mean, if we were investing that money in things here at home, we instead of spending it on this war, we would be so much better off. So there's a personal sacrifice, but then there's the financial sacrifice, which really hits all of us.
They estimate that the total cost of the war now will be $3 trillion when you consider taking care of the veterans as they come home, and all that money that would buy so much that we need in healthcare and, as you say, infrastructure. And
it just, I mean, it's the most, I mean, any war in a sense is a tragedy, Some are maybe more justified than others. I mean, I've talked to a number of folks who are veterans of the Iraq War, who went there believing in what their mission was, and some of them came home not believing in that mission anymore. A number of them, as we know, went and joined the National Guard anyway. They didn't go to war for this reason, but they joined the National Guard in hopes of getting educational benefits or job training, and then found themselves in the midst of a very dangerous war. And it just shows how misguided the Bush administration has been. You wish the Congress and others had stood up to them more. It also shows you what a mistake it will be, frankly, if we elect John McCain president. And our current governor, by the way, is a big supporter of John McCain, who not only says it's okay if we spend another 100 years or so in Iraq, he said that would be okay with him, but he's also, John McCain is also someone who has opposed efforts to rein in fuel costs, petroleum costs. I mean, he supports tax breaks for oil companies, for example, opposes windfall profit taxes on those companies. So he's not only supportive of the military mission that, he says could go on for many, many, many years, but he has not been willing to stand up to the oil industry or try to break our dependence on big oil. And our current governor wants to see this fellow elected president. I mean, it's not going to be that different than another term with George Bush. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't want to be too pessimistic. I think we are going to elect a Democratic president, quite honestly. I think the country's really ready, and I look forward to being governor at a time when there's some better energy down in Washington as well.